Jihagadich, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jay Hodges. I'm a proud friend of Sinn Féin's. Really excited about today. We're going to have a great conversation with Jas McCann, whose new book, 6,000 Days, tells the story of the 17 years he spent as a prisoner in H blocks. His book provides a very honest and raw account of brutality experienced during the blanket protests, the hunger strikes, the 1983 escape, and the electoral rise of Sinn Féin that followed these series of events. I don't want to waste any time because I want to get right to it. I'm excited about today. So please let me welcome Mr. Jas McCann. Jas, how are you doing?
I'm grand. Thanks very much for having me, Dave. I appreciate this.
Well,
opportunity to talk about the 6,000 days and, of course, the hunger strikers.
And well, I can't thank you enough for taking time and joining us. I kind of want to jump right into this because there's a lot to cover, and you're an incredible storyteller. So I really want to get into it now. Your book starts with you being arrested in '76 and taken to Crumlin Road Jail.
Crumlin Road Jail.
Can we start with that?
Yes. 1976, I was arrested, taken to Crumlin Road Jail. What you have to understand. Critical status by that stage had been removed. It was removed on March 1st, 1976, so I missed it by a few months. Prior to that, Republican prisoners were held in a concentration camp, like Second World War and this and huts, and they run the place themselves. And that was removed because the British government decided we cannot portray these people as freedom fighters, that they're political. And therefore, they says we're going to remove political status because we want to criminalize their whole struggle. And that way, they were hoping it's going to affect our support base, particularly in the likes of America as well. They were really concerned about Americans perceiving us, which we were, of course, as freedom fighters. So they removed political status. Of course, there was absolutely no way we were going to accept that. We were not going to allow our cause to be criminalized. We didn't know where we were going, to be quite honest. Whenever you go into jail, you're on remand, so therefore you have your own clothes and so on. So therefore the political status aspect didn't kick in until you're actually sentenced. And then when you're sentenced, they tell you to wear the prison gear, of course, which we refused to do. So to be Crumlin Road Jail, we didn't know what it was going to entail, the removal of political status. We had no idea. We had a number of meetings about it. But I'm quite nostalgic about this. I went to school next door in St. Malachy's College, and I always used to look into the jail. And, I had a sort of premonition, it could well end up there one day because at that stage I would have been in the Fianna Earn, which is like a sort of junior IRA. And of course, I would have known some of the older people who were actually in the jail. And I always used to stare in that jail and think, one day you could end up there. And of course, there I was in C1 Crumlin Jail, looking into St. Malachy's College from the other end. And you would hear the bells going for the different periods, and you would know, oh, that's lunch, that's break, that's the end of the day. And, it was quite, it brought me right back, but there you are. Unfortunately, it was right in my premonition. And I was sentenced in February 1977, and I went up to the H blocks. Can I just say before that, on October, I think it was October 1976, Bobby Sands, Joe McDonnell, Seamus Finucane, and a few others were arrested on a bombing mission, and thankfully come in the Crumlin Road Jail. I went, thankfully, in that, not that they were caught, but I was going to have friends there. Although I had a lot of friends, but they were from the area, and we did tend to be parochial at that stage. So, I was able to spend some time with them, which was good, because we were able to hear, look, when I say scale, I mean use, we're able to hear the local scale, and so on. But anyway, February sentence, up the H blocks, refused to wear the gear, and therefore you're stripped naked and you're thrown in the cell. In the cell, all you have is a Bible, a chair, a table, a water gallon, and a chamber pot, and that's it. And that was your day, 24/7, locked up, no exercise, nothing, absolutely nothing. There was beatings at that time. I would say in the early stages, it was more sporadic than systemic. I think it was about October, November 1977. Joe McDonnell, Bobby Sands, and Jimmy Finucane, again, thankfully, right, come on the wing. Big personalities, great, loads and loads of talent, leadership quality, and a great push to the wing, especially I have to say Bobby and Joe, well-known Republicans, had all been in jail themselves, had been interned. Joe McDonnell was interned twice. He was on the Maidstone, and then of course he was in Long Kesh himself. And here he was now, still a Republican, and now being classed as a criminal, even though he had physical status, for 4 years prior to that.
Sure.
But as I said, it's great to have him back in the wing. Bobby Sands lasted in the wing for about 6-7 months, because what happened was, after over a year's protesting, probably 18 months protesting, being on the blanket, it became like an acceptable level, and that wasn't good enough. Why we weren't giving in, not giving in wasn't winning, and therefore realized, we're going to have to step this up a bit. We're going to have to do something, and then we gradually escalated the protest. And whenever we were escalating the protest, the Irish language became very, very important, because we had to communicate between the four wings, and we didn't want the wardens to know what was going on. And therefore, this is when was a revival of the Gaelic language. And Bobby Sands was fluent. Mickey Ferguson, who was a Centurion councillor in Fockley, who now died, he was in the cell with Joe McDonnell. He was another Gael goer, and therefore they used to take classes, ranks, they called them, to try and improve, to revive the Irish language. And we used it on a regular basis. Bobby was what's called skircher. That means he shouted from one wing to the other, because again, there was a limited amount of Gaelic at this time, and he would have done that. But what happened was then they moved him out of the wing, thinking, the breakdown of line of communication, with him going, which is obviously so silly, because there was others there that knew the language. Joe eventually got to know the language, and in later years, whenever we had 3 blanket blocks, we had H4, 5, and 3. And during particular bad periods, whenever we need to get information and so on across the other blocks, Joe, right, who had obviously a big chest, who was able to, let's say, Joe was able to shout, and Joe would have done the shouting across the other blocks. His brother actually was in H4 across from him. And I always wonder what Frankie would think when he hears Joe's voice, but would never see him. You were talking about a number. You were talking about 4 or 5 years here, not seeing his brother, but just hearing his voice. The thing about Joe, Joe didn't take visits. Now, at the start, none of us took visits. But then whenever we started escalating the protest and saying we're going to have to do something here more, then communication became so important. And we were asked then to take visits. Joe refused to take visits. Joe would not wear that prison uniform. Absolutely. It was an abomination to him. He says, I will wear I will wear my own clothes. And whenever I wear my own clothes, I will go out, I will see my wife, I will see my children, and we will have political status, and we will be victorious, and it'll be great. And you know what? He always believed that was going to happen. He never, ever doubted that. Even in the darkest of times, Joe was so upbeat that this was going to happen. Now, as I said, we escalated the protest. To be quite honest, I never thought it would get as bad as what it did. It was like an amplification spiral. We did something, and the screws reacted, and then we reacted to what they did, and then they reacted. It just went on and on, up and up and up, until we were living in really, really atrocious conditions. I think Vic McFarlane may have explained that in earlier conversations, but basically, we were living in cells. There was no windows. All we had was a couple of blankets, and some of them were more like towels and blankets, tea towels, that. The experiment went on the wall because they were throwing it back into us because we were getting beat up when we were leaving the cells. We didn't have beds. We had what was a couple of bits of sponge. We lay on that. And the beatings then really became, as I said earlier, systemic on a daily basis. Hosing was another weapon of theirs. And we're talking about high-powered hoses, with the fire brigade would use. It would knock you clean off your feet, and absolutely soak the cell and you and whatever belongings you had. Tampering with food was another one. That was on a regular basis as well. Of course, the beatings the various referred to, and even simple things like keeping you awake at night, banging doors, switching lights on and off. All those things went on and on and on. But as I said, we knew we had to escalate it. I didn't think for 1 minute it would have been as bad as what it was. And to be quite honest, when it got so bad, especially the conditions with no wash and so on, I thought it would be something like an epidemic. I didn't believe that the human body could last so long in those conditions. But I was proved wrong again, as I've often been in the past, because the human body is very adaptable, and so is the human mind as well. Because after a while, you did adjust, and it just became part of life, and you accepted it. Now, while you accepted it, you were hoping that it was going to you're going to get political status out of it, that it would achieve your objectives. And really, another big factor in this as well, hunger strike was always in the background. Hunger strike was a traditional means used by Republicans in jail. I mean, you had Thomas Ice back in 1919, and then of course, and she was Sean McCaughey in 45, I think it was, and then of course in 1972, Billy McKay and others went on hunger strikes in criminal jail for political status, and won political status as a result. So the hunger strike was always there, and I was mentioned it a number of times because the thing about hunger strike, it brings it to a conclusion. You know, and like in comparison to years and years on blanket protest, a speedy conclusion. I mean, and it has to be a conclusion of hunger strike. But we also knew that somebody would probably have to die on hunger strike. So what I'm saying is we did everything absolutely possible within the resources we had, which is very few of us in jail. We did everything we could to avoid hunger strike. And that's why we were prepared to live so long in those atrocious conditions and put up with the beatings and the holdings and everything else I said, because at the end of the day, we were concerned that this could well end up in a hunger strike, but we want to do everything, exhaust everything to avoid hunger strike. I mean,
Jazz,
yeah, sorry.
You covered a lot there, and I want to go back a little bit and ask just a couple of questions because you said some things, and I kind of want to hear more specifically about them. So in '76, the British government removes political status. Y'all respond with the blanket protest. Just real briefly, because you talk about it, but I'd kind of like you to actually talk to people and let them know, like, what is prison life like during the blank? Like, what is your, like, I know in Not Meekly Serve My Time, like they talk about, like, there's a cold that you have never experienced until you don't have clothes on. And those kinds of things. Like, what can you share about what it's like as a 20-year-old?
Yes, and I mean, I have mentioned this in 6,000 Days. So I've mentioned all those things about beating and hosing and the food and all those things. But the thing about them was, once they were over. And you knew when you got a beating, you know, you're going to get over it. You knew when you got hosing, you're going to get over it. But the cold was different. I mean, we refer to it as the winter of '78, even though it was mostly in '79. We had no windows, and it was a really, really severe winter. And then they did what's called a blanket change then too. Now, normally we had 3 ordinary blankets, but through these blankets, then you would be lucky if you got 1 blanket, which was full size, and the other 2, as I said, would be something like the size of a tea towel. And I mean, I'm not joking there. There was size of a tea towel, because I recall at nights, whenever you're lying on that bit of sponge, and you have the 2 smaller blankets over you, and then you put the larger one over the top of you, and you're struggling to try and keep the smaller ones on. And of course, it keeps slipping off, and especially your feet were absolutely freezing. And you said, I don't know how I can get through this night. You know, it was a real struggle to get through the night. And this went on and on. It was so difficult. It was easily, no matter what they threw at us, there was nothing worse than the cold. I mean, I saw us putting up, you know, the water gallon, which we put up on the window, and it would be frozen next morning. It was so cold. Sorry.
It puts in, it's such a stark comment to make of, you know, the beatings and the hosings, you knew they would end. And so they were less than the freezing temperatures that you were living in. Like, it just, the strength and the courage to every day say, like, I'm going to continue onto this is astonishing to me. That is a resolve that is amazing.
Giving in was never an option. It was just didn't come into your thinking. We're Republicans. We're not going to criminalize. We're going to achieve our aims. And then you have people, you know, like Joe McDonnell, who was an absolute rock, an inspiration to everybody. Always there, always concerned about all the rest of the lads. Always checking, seeing if everybody's okay. Brilliant storyteller. He could talk, as we would call it, for Ireland. He could talk for Ireland. And he was also, I don't know if you know this term or not, called a raker. You know, that was, you know, something he mixed in, practical joker, and he was always doing that. And you know what? He was just so full of life, just absolutely buzzing. I don't know where he got all his energy from. And he always insisted that there's activities in the wing, you know, organising a concert, organising somebody to narrate a book, organising a debate, organising a quiz. He always wanted something going on the wing. And if there was nothing, he would get up and he would start controlling people. Come on, you have to get up, you have to do this, and so on. Always insisted that there was life in the wing. And I think, you know, part of this was, of course, was that it sent a message out to the screws, out to the wardens. It sent a message out to them that, you know, do your worst. You know, we're still here. We're not going away, and our morale is good. Because you could hear them the sound of laughter and so on, the crack so on going on in the wing, no matter what they threw at us. I mean, I recall some really, really, really bad wing shifts. Now, whenever I say about wing shifts, what happened was in a block you have 4 wings. But whenever the protest escalated, and whenever the no wash started, then they took one wing out, moved it out, so therefore you only have 3 wings and one was empty. And what they would do is then they would clean one of the wings, and then they would move one of the dirtier wings into that. So that would be a wing shift. So you would be a rotating basis. So you would be shifted every 10 to 2 weeks or so, every 10 days to 14 days. And quite honest, that was an excuse for beating. They would have what's called the dreaded mirror shift. They would straddle you over a mirror, and they would try and get you to bend, and you wouldn't, and they would kick you down. Now, to be quite honest, I would say most of us, if not nearly all of us, whenever we were put over that mirror, whenever they kicked the back of our legs, we would go down. It was more like token resistance, because then you're going to get beat about the place, you know. But yet, all your dignity and your pride says, "Well, I'm not bent. There's no way I'm bent, so I have to kick you." But Joe McDonnell, he would not bend at all. He must have had like iron rods in his legs, because they booted him to get him down. And after every wing shift, what we did, we had a roll call. This is quite regular, where the OC would get up as the person in command and say, "Okay, how'd it go? Anybody hurt?" And they would do, you know, substitute, would tell her, you know, I've bruises, I've this, you know, what the injuries were, right? And Joe McDonnell, you know, his legs were always black and blue. And he always used to say to us, like, "How come my legs were always black and blue?" You know, and you couldn't say to Joe, just let them kick your legs in. Couldn't say, because he didn't do tokenism. And you know what? A lot of years later, whenever the protest and all ended, whenever things were different at jail, Screw actually came to me and said, "You know what?" He said, "Joe McDonnell was the hardest man I've ever came across in my life." And that's what he said, you know. And that was Joe. Joe was really, really tough. I mean, I recall the worst of wing shifts. And you know, you're lying in the cell, in a ball in the cell, because you'd nothing them, because they would take the sponge mattress and the blankets. They would take their time and bringing them back, and you'd be sitting in the freezing cold, so on. They would take the time about it. But you're lying in the cell, feeling sorry for yourself, licking your wounds. The wing's quiet because you know everybody else is to see him. And next thing, Joe McDonnell is up at the door, shouting out, you know. And he always had a famous saying, "You know, lads," he says, "there's going to be bad days for these good ones." And, you know, everyone was just, the place was just up and say, just have to admire him. And of course, you know, it was designed obviously to do that, because what he wanted to do was to let the wardens know, "You've done your worst. We're still here. We're not going away, and we're always high." And that was it. He was there in the most important times, and he would never let you lie down. You know, he would always check on people. If it was a particular cell quiet, he would always check, shout at them, "What's up?" And he would, you know, he would use his dark humor and all to get a reaction to make sure that, you know, that they get up, you know. And that was it. And as I said, it was just a car of strength. Very, very passionate about his family, about his children. He had 2 children, his wife Greta and his 2 children. As much as he wanted to visit them, he would not put on those prison clothes. And he talked about them continually. So much so that sometimes they said, "Joe, I can't have the same passion for your children as you do." But, you know, again, you know, I mean, again, I always say to myself, "You know what, if I have children, which I do now," thankfully at that time I didn't know what was going to happen. I said, I hope I was passionate about my children the way he is, and hopefully I have. But,
well, I want to
sorry, go ahead. You want to start in the hunger strike? Go ahead.
I want to ask about Joe. I want to ask about what the hunger strikes were like for you when you were in there. First of all, you and Joe are very close, very good friends.
Well, yeah.
But you're friends with all of them. You're friends with Bobby, like, you know, all these individuals.
I would have known them all.
And hunger strikes was the last thing that you guys wanted to do.
That was it. I mean, yeah, I mean, there was a number. There could have been a number of hunger strikes, and they were postponed. And even Cardinal Fick, at the time of the Pope's visit, was going to be one, and Cardinal Fick appealed to the leadership, please let me do my best, which he did. He did his best, and he had talked with Humphrey Atkins, and then talk was we're going to get our clothes, but then the last minute, Thatcher pulled the plug on that. And then hunger strike became inevitable. And Joe McDonnell was involved, very much involved in the planning of hunger strike. And he was going to be initially one of the ones who's going on the hunger strike. It was going to be initially 9. This is the first hunger strike. And then that was changed to 7 for symbolic reasons, the proclamation, 7 signatures. And also they wanted it on a geographical basis. And Brenton Hughes Dark was going to represent Belfast. So that was understandable with Joe. The first hunger strike didn't go the way it should have went. There was negotiations, there was promises made, but once again, the British, you can see it today with the talk of Brexit. So you can imagine they were like with us, who had no power whatsoever, and of course they reneged on the promises. So right away there was going to be a second hunger strike, and again Joe said, I want to be involved in this. And throughout this period, we're talking back 79, whenever hunger strike was in the background, we're talking about it. And of course, there was debates in the wings about hunger strike. And Joe would have been one of those ones, as I said, who was involved in it. And he would have been conditioning his wife and family that hunger strike was an inevitability and that he was going to want it. I know that for a fact. He was, because I used to ask him about this. I said, what about your wife, Joe? And he says, Greta is 100% behind me. We've talked about this through communications, wrote about this, and she will support me 100%. So he's quite confident about that. So no surprises then whenever the second hunger strike came and Joe was going to be, there was a whole list of people who volunteered for the hunger strike. We're talking over 100. And then I think the first 20, possibly, I'm not sure, I think it was right about that, would have had numbers. And Joe was number 1. Because in the event of Bobby Sands, he would have replaced Bobby, and that's why he was number 1. And I always remember Mick and Bobby were involved in who's going to replace who. And they always said Joe McDonnell, 100%, not let you down. So we're very happy that was Joe, because he was, as I said, he was a rock. So we had hoped that the Fermanagh South Tyrone election would have saved Bobby's life and maybe got his political status, because it completely overturned this idea that we were criminals. It was the exact opposite, But no, Thatcher had dug in. And as I said already, this was a face-to-face competition between Republicans and the British government. And, no way was either apparently going to give in. But we certainly weren't going to give in. So Joe went on the hunger strike. And then he was going to have a visit the next day then, because he was going on hunger strike. I found that very sad, quite honest, because there's the man there who was optimistic, who kept our morale up, and who said, I'm going out on a visit with my own clothes on, with political status. And here he was, his life hanging in balance, going out wearing a prison uniform in very, very sad circumstances. Of course, we did say it, and we kept the crack going that night, What's Greta going to think whenever she sees you in your long hair and so on? All the crack going, And he was very upbeat about it, but it was so sad. It was so sad. And even when he came back from visit, the tone of Joe had changed. You could see the change, obviously seeing his children, seeing his wife impact him, and it impacted Joe to see Joe like that. Now don't get me wrong, his morale was still high, but it was a different Joe.
Sure.
Different Joe. And they moved him. They moved him at the top of the wing to isolate him, all part of the psychological pressure on hunger strikers. And he's with us for 3 weeks. So I always remember it well. I think it was about 3 weeks, 20 days. It was Mass that morning, and we did get out for Mass. It was Ascension Thursday. I was with Joe, as it was with everybody. And Joe was still the same Joe. Joe was very big into cigarettes. He couldn't really get much, obviously in the black. So he's running about trying to get cigarettes from people. Of course, he was giving them, and spread himself about talking to people. Just, Joe, bubbly Joe. And that was the last I saw him. That was it. He did write down to me now whenever he was up in the prison hospital, and again it was the same bubbly, optimistic Joe. Great to hear from him. And comforting as well, because, obviously been up to where we were all concerned about him. But, you're getting a picture here of Joe, a very strong character, both mentally and physically. Now, coming towards the end of the hunger strike, late 50s and the 60s days, that's critical time for a hunger striker, and that's when the momentum really builds, because you're at death's door. Irish Commission, but there was an election in the South. Joe just missed being elected TD by a couple of hundred votes in Sligo-Leitrim, a couple of hundred. And it started to build a wee bit of momentum, and then the Irish Commission of Justice Peace intervened, and there was a lot of talk about getting our own clothes and concessions and so on. And it was great crack in the wing. We're saying Joe McDonnell's going to catch stick, because he's going to say he wants political stars, would never going to be able to listen to him again. And he died. It was so sudden. And again, I don't know much, about the physical body, but I have seen hunger strikers. I've seen hunger strikers come out after 3 weeks and could hardly walk. Joe McDonnell bounced out of the wing in 3 weeks, because and you say Joe McDonnell is going to, be able to carry on for 70, like Kieran Doherty, big strong fellas like Kieran Doherty, won't be able to carry on for 70 days. And then it was only 61 days or something like that. It was unbelievable. So, we weren't prepared for that, I must say, because we built our hopes up, which we shouldn't have done, thinking there's going to be a breakthrough. And next thing, Joe's dead. So I always wondered, did the British, will they play on brinkmanship and think maybe, is this, next conveyor of hunger strike come through? Are they committed as the first 4? And we're hanging on? I don't know. But Joe died very quickly at the end of it. And I always spoke to his wife about this, because it's something I could not understand. I said to Greta, what happened, Joe? And she said that the normal procedure was that when you get to that critical stage, that the family's allowed to stay, but they wouldn't let her stay. And Joe knew this was the normal procedure, because they had talked about it and were told about it. As he said, it's conveyor. You could see down the line, the ones who weren't as far down, to see what's happening in the stages, and what sort of rights you have. Very few, obviously. And she wasn't allowed. She wasn't allowed in. And Joe thought, that she should have been allowed in. And I don't know what sort of psychological pressure they applied to Joe. But Greta, when she got in, said Joe had created. Joe had created. So, clearly that is something to do. But as I say, it was shock. He left a massive gap in the wing. It was so real too. Somebody who's living, bouncing, the life and soul of the wing only a few weeks earlier, and you don't see anything, and they're dead. This was the same with all hunger strikes. They're dead. They're gone. So it was a difficult period. I'm gonna take a breath.
Well, let me change a little bit. I can't. Thank you for talking about Joe, and I always appreciate hearing the stories about people, because I think it makes them more real than what we can get by reading about them. And I'm an avid reader, and I support reading as many books as we can possibly get our hands on. But there's a difference when you hear a friend talk about their friends. There just is a difference. And so I thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I think it really brings him to life for a lot of people that will be tuning in to watch this, or that are tuning in to watch this. Let me shift though, because we only have a little bit of time, and I want to make sure we talk about the escape. Go ahead.
Can I say very quickly? I'll try and rush this all in. Hunger strike was not about penal reform. Hunger strike was all about the struggle. What was lost in jail would be lost for the overall struggle. We knew that, and that's what it was about. Had they given us concessions, yes, that would have ended it. But hunger strike was all about the struggle, the whole struggle, not political status, the whole struggle. That's what it was about. So nobody died for penal reform. So to be honest, that was the most difficult period of my life after hunger strike, because a bit like Joe, I believe we're within political status. There's no way we're going to accept anything else. We didn't get political status. We did get some of our demands. We got the clothes, which is so important because it's symbolic. We got about 3.5 of our demands. And then we got segregation as well, so we were able to organize. But my big concern was there was still one there, and that was work, prison work. And
Sure.
we were still expected to do prison work. I was okay because I was a wing orderly, and you just stay and look after the wing as we normally do. But men were going out to work, and that really, really annoyed me, because 10 men had died, and there's some of our lads going out to work, prison work. Now, the talk was what we were going to do. We're going to burn the workshops, and therefore there would be no work there. But time was going on, and they weren't burning the workshops. But then I realized later, this is when the escape comes into it, that the workshops were of strategic value because people from different blocks were coming together. So we were able to smuggle things from one block to another. For example, they would do big searches in a block every couple of weeks. And therefore, if you got a big search coming, then some of the stuff which you have, which you shouldn't have, let's say,
Yeah.
you could bring it to the workshops, pass it on to another block, and so on. And that way, it was very good. And also, we're getting good communication information from different blocks because the escape wasn't just about H7 escape. There was a lot of men involved in planning the escape and different information coming in from different blocks and so on. So it involved basically the whole Republic of Limerick, but inside the jail. While everybody was not aware of that, in fact, I wasn't aware of the escape until the end of the last week. But whenever they come into me and they said, listen, there's an escape on, everything just fell into place then. That's why we haven't burned the workshops. That's why we haven't been doing all the things we should be doing. It was absolutely fantastic. And the escape was one of the highlights of my life. Absolutely brilliant. So well organized. We held that block for over an hour. And you know what? I was so impressed with entry because you talking about some of those wardens who were there, would have been brutalized prisoners for years. And you know what? We treated them with dignity. When we took their uniforms off, we give them blankets to cover themselves and so on. They were well treated, and as I said, I felt really proud that day as Republican and breaking out, out those gates. That was the big day that Joe McDonnell and others talked about, which they never had, but we said that was our victorious day. And that's the day when everything fell into place. And that's the day whenever the whole operation completed and we got all our demands. Because of that, we got all the demands, which basically was, in another way, it was political stuff. We got everything from that because then there was no way they were going to let us out of those blocks to work anymore. So we had everything. We got our own clothes, we got segregation, we had no work, we had an education system ourselves, we had our own structures, all those things we had as a result of, obviously, most of them came from the protest, the hunger strike, and then from the escape. So the escape, as I said, I highlighted in my life the day that we never got because of the way the blanket and the hunger strikes went, and that was it. And that was our big day. And I said I was very, very proud of the Republican, the way it was organized, and the way there was minimum force use. There was no vengeance, there was no payback. It was get out with minimum force. And it was unfortunate that one of the wardens did die, but he actually took a heart attack. No, we didn't want that. We wanted that. We just want to get clean out. And so it was absolutely brilliant. I'll never forget that. As I said, I was really a proud Republican that day. And it's just unfortunately, the other lads like Joe weren't there to have the big day that they talked about, because the big days then came afterwards.
Sure.
We really organized within our wings, and the blocks were completely different from the way the compound stroke cages were organized. If you see pictures of that, you see marches and lectures on guns. No, we didn't do that. We were political, as the guys were up in the compound as well. There was no marching and none of that. When it was political lectures, we encouraged people to get into education, formal education, political education, all those things, and that's on the growth and Sinn Féin and the language as well. So we used their time, as I often write sometimes on the book, that we didn't count the days, we made the days count. We come out stronger, we come out better. We come out from the Republicans, and I think I can say this, that we certainly helped the growth of Sinn Féin, and even if you look in Stormont and some of the ones in Leinster House too, that a lot of those people now who are public representatives spent a lot of time in H blocks, and of course I have to mention as well the women in Armagh as well.
Absolutely.
They also struggle for political status as well. A lot of them are now public representatives. You see them in Stormont, and you'll see some of the wardens now working in Stormont, opening, closing doors, for the people who they used to lock the doors. Still have to open the door for some of the MLAs who they used to lock up, and they're now serving those MLAs. So there you go. Times have changed.
That's the first time I've heard that. I think
Yeah.
that's interesting. That's really interesting. So
Yeah.
you are released in 1994 after 17 years. Let me ask you this as we kind of wind down here. I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to hear this. What's the big difference between when you went into prison in 76 and when you are released from prison in 94? Like, what's the difference?
Again, the hunger strikes changed so much. We realized that once we went into electoral politics, that there was a massive support base. The Fermanagh electoral was an eye-opener. It was an iconic period in the history of Republicans, that there is lots of support out there. And we decided militarily we were never going to beat the British, and it was going on and on. It was like two opponents going into a ring, and neither of the two of them had a knockout punch. They were just slogging away. So therefore it had to be stopped. And there was another way. There is another way, and we found that through politics. And we had such a big, efficient organization with plenty of skills within that organization, plenty of leadership, and that was used. Again, a lot of that came from the imprisonment, from men spending long years politicizing, and they were able to come out and get involved in community work in particular. Republicans are very much heavily involved in community work, and our support base just grew and grew and grew because you could see that we were putting the work in for our communities, and people respected that. And also, there was a tradition in Nashville as well not to vote, because storming to one offer does nothing. And now they could see, there is something here. There can be movement, and as you say, there was eventually movement when we had the Good Friday Agreement. I don't think people realised at the time how significant that is. We can certainly see it now with Brexit, how important it is, and how much DUP and Royalists want to get rid of it. But you see the progress. It's been slow, it's gradual, and times it's picked up pace. But you can see it certainly today how United Ireland is certainly they're central on the agenda and spoken about on a regular basis. And we're talking about referendum and so on. And it's only going one way. It's only going one way. And again, Sinn Féin Republicans are pushing that along, on and on and on, because we are totally committed and we believe in what we're doing, and we know we're right. And eventually we will. Just like the blanket protest, just like the struggle with political status, eventually we'll get there. There'll be compromises, just like the blanket protest, there'll be compromises on the way. But we have a very clear objective, and we're going to keep moving and moving towards it. So that's the difference. We're politicized. The hunger strikes, the jails help politicize people inside and outside. And also, I would say throughout the world as well, because of the hunger strikes, Ireland became center stage in a lot of countries, and people were saying, what's this all about? And why are the British there? And why are people prepared to die? And how can you say they're criminals? And look at the funerals they have. There's 100,000 at Bobby Sands. How are they criminals? There's people coming out there with rifles and firing salutes over the coffin. How does that happen if they're criminals? People that we have a political ideology here, that the conflict has to end, the British presence has to end. And it was quite clear, graphically clear, to people throughout the world. Well, we knew it so long, but the people throughout the world, and again, there's a lot of support. So I think Tim Pat-Coogan said it, that the hunger strikes is our modern day 1916.
Interesting. So before I let you go, and I want to say thank you very much, Jazz, for speaking with us. I could sit and listen to you for days, just because I think it's such a fascinating and impressive life that you have led. But before I let you go, you bump into a stranger on the street and they want to learn more about anything, about any particular topic or whatever. What is the book that you recommend? What is it that you encourage them to learn more on? Where do you steer a total stranger?
Yeah, apart from 6,000 days, obviously.
There's a book I'm thinking about.
The book, for me, which I will always remember, and was a bit of an eye-opener as well, The Orange State by Michael Farrell, because it lists what has happened, how this state was formed, what went before it, how it's been sustained, this sectarian, oppressive state. And I was amazed myself because, I mean, while I had some politics, this really put it into sharp focus, you know, and also we could realize there's no way that this little state is sustainable. And again, we can see this today. So I highly recommend Michael Farrell's Orange State.
Well, I will. I love that book, but I will highly recommend 6,000 Days. I think that is fantastic, and I really hope everybody spends time. You can find that at the Sinn Féin bookshops, so click the links and go to that. Jazz, thank you again so much for taking time to join us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, man, it has been my honor. So with that, I will ask everybody again to please send this, share this, put this out, send this around. These are the stories that we need to be telling other people, and everybody here knows someone that will find this story to be fascinating and find it to be educational and find it to be, quite honestly, very inspiring. So with that, I will bid everyone a fair adieu, and we will see you soon. Slán.